The GEEK Files, 2026, January 1st. So, middle of August, I started working for Summit Aviation, or whatever Summit Jamie Tate called it. But we're going to have to put one more story about the Empress of Vegreville. So, November 5th of 87, it was obvious that Jimmy Tate and Justin Rogers and Summit were not a good fit for me. Air North was running a fleet of DC-3s and a Navajo that they were using for air ambulance. They had the air ambulance contract at that time. So after work, I wandered down to Air North to talk to Tom Wood, Ace, their chief mechanic. They ran, like most aviation companies, they ran just a bunch of unlicensed mechanics and apprentices, and Ace was the chief mechanic who signed out everything. He was the licensed guy. So Ace and I are sitting there shooting the shit, and the phone rings. And it's snowing like a bandit, and Ace says, "No, it's snowing too heavy. We can't do that," and hangs up the phone. And he says, "Yeah." He says, "Yes, I'm looking for an air ambulance." And so we continue talking about this and that, working for him come this spring. Phone rings again, and Ace kind of is listening, and he kind of looks at me and says, "No, I'm really sorry, but we can't do that. It's snowing too heavy. We can't fly there." And he looks at me and says, "There was something going on at Ross River." He says, "There were some people hurt." And just as he says that, the phone rings again, and he says, "What aircraft?" And then looks at me and says, "Who?" "Look, I'm really, really sorry, but call the ambulances because they're going to have to drive there. We cannot do that. I'd really, really like to, but there's no way that we can fly there." And he hangs up and says, "The Caribou's crashed." And I look at him and say, "What?" He says, "Yeah, and they've got 2 survivors, but they're mechanics." And my heart sinks. Now, in the time before the internet, I'd lost track of where the Caribou was. I knew that sooner or later it would come through town because that's the Caribou. I still assumed that Dean and Greg were flying it. So I assumed that Dean and Greg had died. And Greg had a girlfriend, a serious girlfriend in Whitehorse. And I'm going, "Oh, fuck, I gotta go tell." Man, I can't remember her name, Donna, about this. And I'm just like crushed. One of the continuing faults that I never got to fix on the Caribou was the nose gear had a hydraulic leak in it, so that it would develop an air pocket, and sometimes the nose gear descended forward, and because it was a military aircraft, they had a nitrogen charge, so that if you lost hydraulic power, you could blow the nose gear down. The main gear came down towards the aft, so they would just free fall and lock in place. The nitrogen cartridge had a leak, and you had to really keep it up, and that every couple of days you had to fill it. So you had to cycle the nose gear. Unknown to me at the time, shortly after I got fired, Dean had had enough of Pennicott just pissing him off all the time just to watch him get pissed off, and had quit. And one of the air spray guys that was flying their converted A-26s. George, I knew George, man, I can't remember his last name. Scottish last name, McGuinness, had been hired and was captain, which was really weird because Greg had far more time on type than George. George had more hours total on twin greasy engine aircraft, but Greg knew the aircraft inside and out, so that was really strange. And when they're coming into Ross River, the right engine had overheated and had lost oil and overheated. And so they're trying to make an emergency landing in low ceiling, heavy snow in Ross River. The nose gear didn't come down, so they tried to, instead of just being pilots, they tried to go around and cycle the gear, which we did. Dean and Greg normally left lots of time to cycle the nose gear down because it's an old, Caribou was old and slow. You really didn't have to worry about landing speed. And for some reason, on the go-around, the aircraft all of a sudden lost height. The right wing touched the ground and they spun in. Al was in, so Dean and Greg both died. There was 2 passengers on the aircraft, which is weird because there's only one jump seat and one seat belt. And they were found, luckily this happened, so this is 4:30 in the afternoon up north in November, so it's dark out. And someone was out on their snowmobile and had heard it crash. And so they went to the crash site and walking down the river, the frozen river, because it's minus 20 at the time, are 2 survivors. And picked them up on the snowmobile. Now they're injured, but not severely injured. And got them to some warmth. And so now they're trying to get them to Whitehorse, where there's a hospital, because Ross River just had a nurse's clinic, I think, at the time. Turns out one of the mechanics is a good friend of mine, Al Putland, from aviation school. So we'll get back to me going to Dawson, Northern Lights College in Dawson Creek, and Al Putland and Jeff Shipley. But Al was in the jump seat when this thing went in, and basically he walked away from it with a punctured calf and a broken collarbone, which is just fucking amazing. Probably get a strike for that, but just absolutely amazing. And it's amazing that the snowmobiler was out there, or they would have frozen to death trying to walk up. The other mechanic, everyone had piled all of their gear up against the forward bulkhead, so he would have been sleeping there on top of the gear on the way up. And he basically walked away from it. He had a broken arm or something, but it was just like, considering that the violence of the crash, they both just literally walked away from it. Miracle, absolute miracle. What had happened, so in a previous story, I saying how much these reversing props just puked oil, and I could never, there was never enough time to fix it properly, to pull the props apart and get the prop shafts hard chrome back and then ground down to proper size. So eventually, after I got fired, they decided to put standard props on the aircraft. And remember this owner of VYZ, who, we did the platter run for, and then was down and instigated Pennicott firing me. Well, he and Pennicott, after they did the prop change, went out for a test flight, and they came back, and there was, under the right engine, there was this, right engine was covered in oil, and it was dripping oil everywhere. Ha, 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 it's a Caribou, it's an R2000, that's what they do. It walked away, never realizing there was a serious oil leak on the right engine. So when George, Greg, and Al and this other, I can't remember the other mechanic's hand, took off, they were going to run out of oil on the right engine, and they did that in Ross River. Yeah, so I went down. I didn't know it was Al. Al was one of the mechanics. I don't know how I found out. Maybe I really don't remember how. I might have gone up to talk to the two mechanics, because I figured look, there just isn't that many mechanics, caribou mechanics in the country, especially endorsed mechanics. And so I had to have known these guys. And I think that's when I found out, like, holy crap, it's Al. So neither of these mechanics were endorsed. Typical Steve Pennicott, it's a caribou, who gives a crap, just send it. And neither of them had time on the R2000. Neither of them had any significant time on the airframe. Just really, neither of them had any significant time on any heavy piston aircraft, period, at that time. Al had lots of time. I'd got Al a job at Central in Sulacau. So he had lots of time on round stuff. And Al's a really good mechanic. Like, he's the mechanic that I always wanted to be. He really is. We'll talk about Al more, but yeah, like Al Putland, yeah, he's your man. So yeah, basically Pennicott sent these guys. I'm going to be probably, I don't really know how to put this, because it's still hard for me, very, very hard. But basically, I believe that Steve Pennicott, in his arrogance, sent the Caribou on its way to its crash. Like, to laugh about that much oil leaking from an engine. So that was the first time I got to sit down with both the DOT and the NTSB about, okay, you signed this aircraft out. What was it like? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? So yeah, so here I am grieving the death of a very good friend and another guy that I knew quite well. Knew George really well from hanging around. Airspray, knew George out of Whitehorse, because Airspray had the firebombing contract with the A-26. Yeah, what a guy. So yeah, that was tough, talking to these guys and bringing it all back up. And was the result. So in the investigation, it was claimed that the oil leak was known on the right engine after the test flight, and it was a misunderstanding between Pennicott and the maintenance crew about the seriousness of it and whether to fix it. Um, then yeah, so that was the end of UX and some good friends. Time to spare, go by air.